The most advanced civilizations learned how to conquer stars, but only one small blue world learned how to leave its front door open for a stranger. Snow drifted across the quiet streets of Ashwood, Colorado, settling gently on rooftops, mailboxes, and the towering pine trees that framed the sleepy little town. Christmas lights shimmered beneath the fresh blanket of white, turning every home into a tiny island of warmth against the crisp December night. The air carried the scent of pine needles, cinnamon, roasted chestnuts, and wood smoke curling from old brick chimneys. Somewhere in the distance, church bells echoed through the frozen air, their familiar melody drifting across the valley like an invitation everyone already understood. High above the clouds, invisible to every human eye, a silver observation vessel floated silently in low orbit. Its surface reflected the stars so perfectly that it disappeared into the darkness, becoming nothing more than another piece of the winter sky. Inside the vessel, soft golden light illuminated a circular chamber where dozens of holographic displays rotated around a single elegant figure. Saren Vallis stood motionless before them, her pearl-white skin glowing faintly beneath the ambient light. Her platinum hair rested neatly across her shoulders, catching every movement of the holograms like strands of polished silver. Her large violet-gold eyes moved calmly from one report to another, absorbing data with practiced precision. According to every scientific record her civilization had gathered, Earth was still considered a developing world. Human technology remained centuries behind the galactic accord. Their energy systems were inefficient. Their transportation remained primitive. Their medicine was impressive for its level, yet far from exceptional. Statistically, there was nothing remarkable about humanity. Yet every year, independent observers returned with reports that made little logical sense. They described entire towns feeding strangers without payment, families welcoming complete outsiders into their homes, firefighters risking their own comfort for neighbors they barely knew, children giving away presents they had waited months to receive. None of those actions fit any accepted model of advanced civilization. Across thousands of inhabited worlds, progress had always followed the same equation. Efficiency created stability. Stability created prosperity. Emotion remained secondary. Humans, however, continued to violate that equation with surprising consistency. A calm synthetic voice interrupted the silence. Observer Saren Vallis. Mission briefing confirmed. Objective: study the annual Terran phenomenon designated Christmas. Primary focus: collective emotional behavior. Secondary focus: resource distribution among unrelated individuals. Final assessment required within 72 Earth hours. Saren acknowledged the instructions with a slight nod. Probability of discovering an unknown social technology. The computer paused for less than a second. Less than 1%. She expected that answer. Throughout history, statistics had always outweighed miracles. Another display expanded before her, revealing hundreds of potential observation candidates scattered across North America. Politicians, scientists, wealthy entrepreneurs, military officers, community leaders. Then one profile quietly appeared near the bottom of the list, almost hidden beneath thousands of names. Caleb Walker. Age 33. Occupation: firefighter and volunteer emergency medical technician. Residence: Ashwood, Colorado. Marital status: single. Income: slightly below the national average. Criminal record: none. Psychological evaluation compiled from public behavioral data described him with only 3 words. Dependable. Honest. Compassionate. Saren tilted her head slightly. No prestigious career. No political influence. No scientific achievements. Objectively, he was an ordinary man living an ordinary life. She almost dismissed the profile before another series of statistics appeared. Over the previous 5 years, Caleb Walker had volunteered more than 1,000 hours serving people outside his assigned duties. He regularly donated blood, delivered groceries during winter storms, repaired elderly neighbors' furnaces without charging for labor, and quietly funded Christmas gifts for children whose families could not afford them. Among more than 8 billion humans, his documented pattern of voluntary assistance to unrelated individuals ranked within the highest 0.0003%. His behavioral consistency exceeded every known galactic social model for reciprocal cooperation. None of those actions generated personal profit. None improved his social status. Most had never appeared on local news. Saren stared at the figures longer than she expected. Behavior classified as economically irrational, she whispered. The computer responded without emotion. Assessment revised. Subject Caleb Walker is statistically extraordinary despite ordinary social status. Recommendation: high-value observation candidate. Outside the observation window, Earth slowly rotated beneath the silent vessel, wrapped in clouds that glowed beneath the moonlight. Tiny clusters of Christmas lights sparkled across entire continents like constellations that had somehow fallen to the ground. Saren stepped toward the transport platform, her expression calm but quietly curious. Somewhere below, millions of humans were preparing for a celebration built around generosity instead of conquest, family instead of hierarchy, and hope instead of certainty. She had crossed nearly 600 light-years expecting to study an outdated civilization. She had no way of knowing that before Christmas morning arrived, one statistically extraordinary man living an ordinary life would quietly challenge everything her people believed about what truly made a civilization advanced. Morning arrived beneath a sky the color of polished steel, and Ashwood slowly awakened beneath a fresh layer of snow that softened every rooftop and sidewalk. Snowplows rumbled through the streets while children in oversized winter coats hurried toward school, leaving crooked footprints that disappeared almost as quickly as they formed beneath another gentle snowfall. Store owners brushed frost from their windows before switching on strings of warm, white Christmas lights, even though the sun had barely climbed above the mountains. The entire town seemed to move with quiet purpose, as though everyone had silently agreed that kindness required preparation long before the holiday itself arrived. Several hundred feet above Main Street, hidden behind an optical field no Earth technology could penetrate, Saren's observation shuttle hovered silently between drifting clouds. Transparent displays floated around her seat, recording every conversation, every gesture, every exchange of goods across the town below. Her analytical program categorized each interaction according to efficiency, economic value, and expected personal return. The numbers remained frustratingly inconsistent. A bakery owner handed a box of fresh cinnamon rolls to an elderly customer whose wallet had slipped from her coat pocket somewhere outside. Instead of refusing service, he smiled, wished her a Merry Christmas, and promised she could pay whenever she found it. The computer immediately flagged the transaction as a financial loss. Saren quietly marked it for further review. Minutes later, another anomaly appeared. A teenage boy stopped to help a younger child rebuild a snowman that had collapsed beneath heavy snow. They laughed together for nearly 10 minutes before walking in opposite directions, complete strangers who would likely never meet again. No payment, no obligation, no measurable reward. Saren folded her hands thoughtfully. Her civilization had achieved peace by eliminating unnecessary emotional decisions. Human beings seemed to preserve theirs because of them. By mid-morning, a familiar profile appeared on her display. Caleb Walker stepped out of Station 7 wearing a navy blue winter jacket over his department uniform, carrying a travel mug that released thin curls of steam into the freezing air. His shift had ended less than 15 minutes earlier according to public emergency records. Yet instead of driving home, he crossed the street toward a small neighborhood diner where several volunteers had already gathered around 2 pickup trucks filled with cardboard boxes. Saren adjusted the observation camera. Labels printed across the boxes read Winter Food Drive and Community Christmas Dinner. Caleb greeted everyone with an easy smile, accepted a pair of thick work gloves from an older volunteer, and immediately began lifting heavy crates into the truck bed. Nobody appeared to be directing him. Nobody applauded his arrival. He simply noticed work that needed to be done and quietly became part of it. One volunteer laughed as she handed him a clipboard. "You know, you just finished a 24-hour shift. Most people would be asleep." Caleb shrugged while tightening a cargo strap across the supplies. "Sleep will still be there this afternoon. Mrs. Henderson cannot carry 20-pound boxes by herself." The woman smiled. "You always have an answer." "Not always," Caleb replied. "Just enough to keep moving." Saren replayed the exchange twice. Fatigue indicators from his wearable medical monitor suggested he should already be resting. Instead, he voluntarily exchanged his remaining energy for someone else's comfort. Again, the The behavior failed every predictive model her people considered rational. The convoy slowly departed toward the church on the edge of town, where volunteers unloaded canned food, blankets, children's toys, and folding tables inside a modest brick building decorated with evergreen wreaths and handmade ornaments. Saren expected an organized distribution system based upon priority rankings or social status. She found none. Wealthy families worked beside retirees. Teenagers carried boxes alongside business owners. Young children proudly arranged cookies on paper plates while older neighbors swept melting snow from the entrance so strangers would not slip. No one asked who deserved help more than anyone else. They simply prepared enough seats for whoever might arrive. Saren watched quietly as another note appeared in her mission log. Human collective behavior continues to contradict accepted models of advanced resource management. Recommendation: extend direct observation of subject Caleb Walker. Preliminary conclusion: the holiday itself may not be the phenomenon under investigation. The people may be. The afternoon sun never fully broke through the thick winter clouds, leaving Ashwood wrapped in a soft silver light that made every snow-covered rooftop glow with quiet warmth instead of brilliance. Inside the small brick church, the scent of fresh coffee mixed with pine wreaths and cinnamon cookies, while volunteers transformed the fellowship hall into a place that looked less like a shelter and more like someone's family dining room. Folding tables disappeared beneath red tablecloths. Handmade ornaments hung from every window. Children carefully placed paper snowflakes they had cut at school onto the walls, each one slightly different, each one proudly imperfect. Saren stood unnoticed beneath the shimmer of her adaptive field near the back of the hall, watching dozens of humans prepare for guests who had not yet arrived. Her scanners identified retirees with arthritis carrying serving trays, teenagers arranging chairs, business owners unloading food, and elementary school children tying ribbons around wrapped presents. None of them appeared related. None shared a common employer. Yet every individual worked with remarkable coordination despite receiving no visible orders. Her civilization would have called such an operation inefficient. Earth somehow made it look effortless. Caleb moved quietly among them without assuming command. When an elderly volunteer struggled to lift a box of canned vegetables, he reached for it before she could ask. When a little boy accidentally dropped an entire stack of paper cups across the floor, Caleb simply knelt beside him, helped gather every cup, and joked that gravity liked Christmas parties too. The child laughed so hard that the mistake disappeared before embarrassment had a chance to settle in. Saren recorded another note. Subject consistently prevents emotional discomfort before addressing physical tasks. Unexpected behavioral priority. She followed Caleb as he stepped outside carrying several extra blankets toward an aging pickup truck parked beside the church. An older man climbed out slowly, brushing snow from his worn boots before apologizing for arriving late. Caleb answered with the same easy smile he seemed to offer everyone. You made it. That is what matters. Together they unloaded several boxes filled with donated winter coats. Saren noticed one thick navy coat with its original store tags still attached. The fabric was new, insulated, and noticeably better than the faded jacket Caleb had worn all morning. She assumed it belonged to him. Minutes later, a young mother arrived holding the hand of a little girl whose pink gloves were several sizes too large. The child's coat barely reached her wrists, and each gust of wind made her shoulders shiver despite her brave smile. Caleb glanced toward the unopened navy coat, hesitated for only a heartbeat, then lifted it from the box. He crouched until he was eye level with the little girl. Would you help me with something? He asked gently. She nodded. I think I accidentally picked the wrong size when these donations came in. Would you mind trying this one for me? The little girl slipped her arms into the warm coat. It fit almost perfectly. Her eyes widened with quiet amazement as she buried her hands inside the deep pockets. Her mother blinked several times before whispering, Are you sure? Caleb smiled again, already fastening the zipper. Looks like it found exactly the right owner. He never mentioned that it had been his. He simply returned to unloading boxes wearing the same faded jacket he had arrived in that morning. Saren remained perfectly still. Her analytical display calculated the transaction automatically. Personal loss, measurable. Social gain, minimal. Economic return, 0. Emotional response among nearby humans, significantly elevated. She disabled the calculation. For the first time since reaching Earth, the numbers felt strangely incomplete. As the little girl skipped toward the church entrance, laughing while snowflakes landed on the sleeves of her new coat, Saren realized she had stopped observing Caleb as a research subject. Without fully understanding when it had happened, she had begun watching him the way humans watched one another, searching not for efficiency, but for meaning. Icicles had begun to form beneath the church gutters by late afternoon, catching the pale winter light like rows of tiny crystal lanterns. Inside, laughter drifted through the fellowship hall as volunteers sampled soup, adjusted decorations, and compared handwritten recipes that had been passed through generations of local families. No one seemed concerned about perfection. One wreath leaned slightly to the left. Several ornaments hung at uneven heights. One strand of lights blinked at its own unpredictable rhythm. Yet the room felt complete in a way Saren found impossible to quantify. Her people believed beauty came from flawless design. Humans appeared to discover it inside shared effort. Caleb stepped outside, carrying an empty cardboard box toward the recycling bin behind the church. A sharp gust of mountain wind swept across the parking lot, carrying loose snow in graceful spirals that danced around his boots. He pulled the zipper of his faded jacket a little higher, though it offered far less warmth than the new coat he had quietly given away earlier. His cheeks had turned slightly red from the cold, but his pace never slowed. Saren remained hidden only a few yards away beneath her adaptive field, watching him with growing curiosity instead of detached analysis. She noticed details she had ignored before. Caleb greeted every passerby by name. He remembered whose grandson had returned from college, whose husband was recovering from surgery, whose dog had finally learned not to chase delivery trucks. These conversations lasted only seconds, yet each person walked away smiling as though they had received something valuable. No transaction appeared on any scanner. Still, something meaningful had been exchanged. A sudden mechanical cough echoed across the street. An aging sedan rolled to an awkward stop beside the curb, releasing a thin cloud of white steam that quickly vanished into the freezing air. An elderly woman stepped out, wrapped tightly in a knitted scarf, looking first beneath the hood and then toward the empty street with quiet uncertainty. Before Saren could even process the situation, Caleb had already crossed the road. "Looks like your car picked a bad day to complain," he said with a gentle smile. The woman sighed softly. "I was trying to bring pies to the senior center. I think it finally decided it has had enough winters." Caleb glanced at his watch. He was expected back inside within minutes to help prepare the evening deliveries, yet he simply rolled up his sleeves despite the cold. Steam drifted upward as he carefully examined the engine compartment. Saren's scanner identified a loose coolant hose. The repair required less than 5 minutes. Caleb tightened the connection, using nothing more than a screwdriver borrowed from his truck. He tested the engine once more. This time it settled into a smooth, steady rhythm. Relief spread across the woman's face. She reached into her purse and offered him several folded bills. Caleb shook his head almost immediately. "Please keep it. Maybe buy yourself another pie after Christmas." The woman smiled with eyes that shimmered more brightly than the snow around them. "Young man, your parents raised you well." Caleb looked toward the church windows where warm yellow light spilled across the snow. For just a moment, his smile carried the quiet weight of memory. "They tried their best," he answered softly. "Christmas was always their favorite time of year." The woman squeezed his gloved hand before driving away at a careful pace. Saren watched the taillights disappear between rows of decorated storefronts until they became tiny red stars against the falling snow. Her display automatically generated another familiar conclusion. Subject declined financial compensation. Estimated personal economic disadvantage, increasing. She dismissed the notification before it finished calculating. Instead, she opened a blank observation log and began typing something no algorithm had suggested. Humans repeatedly transform ordinary moments into lasting memories through voluntary kindness. Value cannot be accurately measured through material exchange alone. She paused, reading her own words with quiet surprise. They sounded less like scientific analysis and more like understanding. As church bells rang once again across the valley and snowflakes settled silently upon Caleb's shoulders while he walked back toward the glowing entrance, Saren realized the mission was slowly changing her as surely as Christmas was changing the town around her. Evening settled gently over Ashwood as the last traces of daylight faded behind the snow-covered mountains, leaving the town wrapped in the warm glow of porch lights, decorated storefronts, and glowing Christmas trees visible through frosted windows. The church parking lot gradually emptied as volunteers climbed into their cars, waving goodbye with promises to return before sunrise. Caleb remained behind, stacking the final folding chairs while soft holiday music drifted through the nearly empty fellowship hall. The scent of fresh pine, baked bread, and hot chocolate lingered in the quiet room, settling into every corner like memories waiting to be made. Saren watched from the edge of the hall beneath her concealed field, no longer rushing to categorize every human interaction. She found herself simply observing. A volunteer approached Caleb carrying a clipboard. "Everything is ready for tomorrow except one thing," she said. "The Walker table." Caleb looked toward the dining area where dozens of round tables had already been decorated with evergreen centerpieces and handwritten place cards. Near the center of the room stood a slightly larger table prepared with simple elegance. 6 chairs surrounded it. 5 contained neatly folded napkins. The 6th remained empty except for a single white plate, polished silverware, and a small candle that had not yet been lit. Caleb walked over and quietly adjusted the chair until it sat perfectly beneath the table. "Looks good," he said. The volunteer smiled. "You always save that seat." Caleb nodded almost absent-mindedly. "Someone usually needs it." Saren focused every sensor on the conversation. She had noticed no reservation attached to the chair. No family member had been assigned to it. According to every logistical model she knew, preparing resources for an unidentified individual reduced operational efficiency. Yet nobody questioned the decision. The volunteers simply straightened the tablecloth and replied, "I hope whoever it is finds their way here." Caleb smiled softly. "That is the idea." After she left, the hall became almost silent except for the gentle hum of the heating system and the occasional crackle from the stone fireplace near the entrance. Caleb remained standing beside the empty chair for several quiet moments before extinguishing a few decorative candles and gathering his gloves. Saren followed as he stepped outside into the crisp night air. Snowflakes drifted lazily beneath the streetlights, turning the entire parking lot into a field of shimmering white. Across the street, several houses displayed handmade signs reading "Everyone welcome" and "Merry Christmas" from the Wilson family. Laughter escaped through open front doors as neighbors carried covered dishes from one home to another without knocking. A teenage girl carefully shoveled the sidewalk of an elderly couple before hurrying home. A father and his young son stopped to brush fresh snow from a stranger's parked car simply because they had already finished clearing their own driveway. No one appeared to be performing for recognition. They behaved as though these small acts were as natural as breathing. Saren slowly lowered her recording device. For the first time in her professional career, she deliberately chose not to document several moments. She wanted to experience them before analyzing them. The distinction surprised her. Her communicator emitted a soft tone. A transmission from the observation vessel requested her preliminary findings. Saren hesitated before answering. "Current assessment remains incomplete," she said quietly. "Please specify missing data." The artificial intelligence replied. Saren looked once more toward the church, where the empty chair remained visible through the softly illuminated window, waiting for someone whose name nobody knew. She answered with unusual uncertainty. "I have measured generosity. I have measured cooperation. I have measured resource sharing. None explain what I am observing." A brief silence followed. "Clarify." Saren watched Caleb disappear into the snowy street, waving to another neighbor before continuing toward home. "The humans are not preparing Christmas for the people they love," she whispered. "They are preparing it for the people who think nobody loves them. I do not yet possess the correct framework to understand why." The transmission ended without response, leaving only the quiet sound of distant church bells echoing across the sleeping town as snow continued falling over an empty chair that somehow already felt occupied by hope itself. Christmas Eve arrived beneath a sky filled with slow drifting snow that seemed to soften every sound across Ashwood. The streets glowed beneath strings of warm white lights stretching from storefront to storefront, while the scent of evergreen wreaths, fresh gingerbread, and roasted coffee floated through the crisp mountain air. Every window reflected another window filled with light, until the entire town looked like a constellation that had quietly settled upon the earth. High above the valley, hidden beyond every telescope and weather satellite, Saren's observation vessel remained perfectly still. Yet for the first time since accepting her assignment, she did not return to it when night approached. She continued walking through the town beneath her adaptive field, allowing herself to hear conversations without filtering them into statistics. A young couple laughed while carrying wrapped presents toward their grandparents' house. Two teenage brothers argued playfully over who had forgotten the hot chocolate before laughing at themselves moments later. An elderly man carefully scattered birdseed across fresh snow before whispering, "Merry Christmas, little friends." None of those moments changed history. Somehow, together, they felt larger than history itself. Caleb arrived home shortly after sunset. His small white house sat near the edge of town beside a frozen creek lined with towering pine trees. Warm yellow light spilled through the living room windows where a modest Christmas tree stood decorated with handmade ornaments collected over many years. Saren expected the home of such a generous man to be crowded with guests preparing for the holiday. Instead, only silence greeted him. Caleb removed his boots near the front door, hung his faded jacket beside an old family photograph, and quietly switched on a string of lights wrapped around the tree. The room immediately felt warmer, although the temperature remained unchanged. Saren hesitated outside the window. Every observation until now had taken place among groups. This was the first time she had witnessed Caleb completely alone. He prepared a simple dinner, then carefully folded several freshly washed blankets into a canvas bag beside neatly wrapped presents labeled only with first names. A knock sounded at the door before he could sit down. Caleb opened it to find Mrs. Henderson from across the street, holding a steaming casserole dish covered with foil. "I know you were planning another frozen dinner," she teased gently. "Do not even try denying it." Caleb laughed. "You know me too well." Before he could thank her, another neighbor arrived carrying homemade cinnamon bread. Then came an older widower with a container of soup. Moments later, two children appeared with hand-painted Christmas cookies and a card covered in glitter that read, "Thank you for helping everybody." Caleb blinked several times, clearly caught off guard. "You all really did not have to do this." Mrs. Henderson smiled warmly. "Maybe not, but you have been taking care of everyone else all month. We figured somebody should remember you too." They stayed only a few minutes before wishing him good night and disappearing back into the softly falling snow, leaving the small kitchen table covered with more food than one person could possibly eat. Caleb stood quietly beside the table, smiling to himself before whispering, "Mom would have loved this." Saren felt an unfamiliar sensation settle inside her chest as she watched from the darkness. Earlier, she had believed kindness flowed in only one direction, from Caleb toward everyone around him. Now she realized something different. The town had quietly been watching him as carefully as she had. They noticed every unseen sacrifice. They simply waited for the right moment to return it. Her communicator activated once more. "Observer Saren Vallis," the vessel requested. "You have exceeded your scheduled surface observation period." Saren continued looking through the softly glowing window where Caleb carefully divided every gifted meal into smaller containers, placing several back into the canvas bag beside the blankets and presents. Even after receiving unexpected generosity, he was preparing to share it again. Saren answered almost absent-mindedly, "I require additional time." "State reason." She watched Caleb switch off the kitchen light before carrying the canvas bag toward the front door, ready for another early morning of helping strangers. Snow settled quietly across the porch railing as church bells echoed through the valley. Saren finally understood why her mission still felt incomplete. "I came to study a holiday," she whispered. "Instead, I have discovered a way of living." Christmas morning arrived without fanfare, only the quiet hush that follows a night of gentle snowfall. Ashwood looked untouched beneath the first light of dawn, every rooftop covered in fresh white, every pine branch carrying a delicate crown of ice that sparkled whenever the rising sun slipped through the clouds. The streets remained almost empty except for faint tire tracks leading toward the church. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, carrying the comforting scent of burning oak and cinnamon into the crisp mountain air. Caleb loaded the canvas bag into his pickup truck before sunrise. Inside rested neatly folded blankets, containers of homemade food, children's presents, and several handwritten Christmas cards collected from neighbors the night before. He drove slowly through quiet neighborhoods, stopping first at the home of an elderly veteran who could no longer leave his porch without assistance. Then he visited a young mother recovering from surgery, leaving breakfast at her doorstep before quietly driving away without waiting for thanks. Saren followed from above in her concealed shuttle, no longer reading reports as often as she watched with her own eyes. The patterns had become familiar, yet they continued to surprise her. Every destination revealed another small act of care hidden beneath ordinary routines. No ceremony announced these moments. They simply happened because someone noticed another person's need. As Caleb turned toward the church, his emergency radio crackled softly across the cab. A comm dispatcher reported that an elderly resident named Mr. Douglas had failed to arrive for the community Christmas breakfast after missing several scheduled phone calls. Heavy overnight snowfall had blocked the narrow mountain road leading to his cabin. Caleb answered without hesitation. "I am already nearby. I will check on him." No one ordered him to respond. His shift had officially ended the previous afternoon. Yet he immediately steered the truck toward the snow-covered hillside beyond town. Saren felt an unfamiliar urgency settle inside her. Her formal observation window had officially ended only minutes earlier, and mission protocols no longer prohibited direct contact under humanitarian circumstances. For the first time since arriving on Earth, the decision was entirely her own. The mountain road narrowed until snow covered most of the pavement, forcing Caleb to continue at a careful pace. Pine trees stood silent on either side, while gentle flakes drifted through the pale morning light. After several miles, he parked beside a weathered mailbox nearly hidden beneath snow. The final stretch could only be crossed on foot. Caleb lifted the heavy canvas bag onto one shoulder and began walking through knee-deep snow toward the small cabin visible between the trees. Saren quietly disengaged her adaptive field. Soft light shimmered around her as she stepped from behind the pines, no longer invisible. Caleb stopped, surprised but remarkably calm as he found a young woman with pearl-white skin, platinum hair, and luminous violet-gold eyes standing quietly beneath snow-covered branches. Neither spoke for several heartbeats. Snow settled gently upon Saren's silver hair, while church bells echoed faintly from the valley below. "You have been following me," Caleb finally said, his voice curious rather than fearful. Saren lowered her eyes briefly before answering with complete honesty. "Yes. Are you from very far away?" A faint smile touched her face. "Farther than your maps can measure." Caleb studied her elegant features, the subtle patterns of light beneath her skin, and the extraordinary calm in her expression. Then his eyes drifted toward the heavy canvas bag. He remembered seeing fresh footprints beside his own only moments earlier where the trail became steeper. She had quietly stepped forward and steadied the weight of the bag without being asked before revealing herself. She carried no weapon. She demanded nothing. She offered no explanation beyond the truth she was willing to share. Whatever she was, her actions had already answered the questions fear usually asked first. Caleb nodded once, his expression softening into the same quiet kindness Saren had watched him offer everyone else. "Well," he said, adjusting his grip on the canvas bag, "where I come from, Christmas is not the best day to let someone spend it alone." He glanced toward the distant cabin. "Would you like to help me?" Saren had prepared thousands of possible responses for first contact with humanity. Diplomatic greetings, scientific explanations, formal declarations. None of them seemed to belong in this quiet forest on Christmas morning. She stepped forward instead, taking hold of the other side of the canvas bag. Together they continued through the fresh snow toward the waiting cabin, leaving two sets of footprints stretching side by side beneath towering pines. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Saren realized she was no longer observing humanity from a distance. She was walking beside it. The small cabin stood quietly beneath towering pines, its roof buried beneath fresh snow while thin ribbons of smoke drifted from the stone chimney into the bright Christmas morning sky. Caleb climbed the wooden steps carrying one side of the heavy canvas bag, while Saren matched his pace without effort, her pearl-white hand steady against the worn handles. The forest was almost silent except for the distant call of a mountain jay and the soft crunch of boots pressing into untouched snow. Caleb knocked gently before opening the unlocked door a few inches. "Mr. Douglas," He called with an easy warmth that sounded more like greeting an old friend than checking on a neighbor. "It is Caleb. I brought breakfast." A cheerful voice answered from inside almost immediately. "About time you got here. I was beginning to think the snow had won." Caleb laughed with visible relief as they stepped into the warm cabin. The room smelled of cedar, fresh coffee, and the faint sweetness of apple pie. A modest Christmas tree stood near the window, decorated with handmade wooden ornaments and faded family photographs instead of expensive decorations. An elderly man with silver hair sat comfortably beneath a thick quilt, smiling despite the cane resting beside his chair. "Road was blocked," Caleb explained while setting the bag on the kitchen table. "We figured you should not spend Christmas eating canned soup." Mr. Douglas smiled warmly before his eyes settled on Saren. He blinked once, clearly surprised. His gaze shifted quietly toward Caleb, searching for an explanation. Caleb met his eyes with a calm smile and gave the slightest reassuring nod. The old man relaxed almost immediately, as though years of judging character had taught him to trust Caleb's judgment before his own assumptions. A gentle smile returned to his face. "Well then," he said softly, "Merry Christmas, Saren from very far away." Saren blinked in surprise before quietly answering, "Merry Christmas." The simple exchange carried none of the fear, suspicion, or caution she had prepared herself to encounter if humans discovered her appearance. Instead, Mr. Douglas pointed toward the kitchen with quiet hospitality. "There are 3 mugs in the cabinet. Christmas coffee tastes better when nobody drinks alone." While Caleb warmed soup and unpacked the food collected from neighbors across town, Saren wandered slowly through the cozy cabin. Every shelf held memories instead of valuables. Old fishing photographs, children's drawings carefully framed despite their faded colors, handwritten Christmas cards reaching back decades. On the fireplace mantel rested a picture of a smiling woman standing beside Mr. Douglas beneath the very same tree many years earlier. Saren studied the photograph quietly before asking, "She is no longer here?" The old man nodded gently, his eyes remaining soft rather than sorrowful. "She has been gone 8 Christmases now." Saren lowered her gaze. "Yet you still celebrate." Mr. Douglas smiled toward the glowing tree. "Because love does not disappear when someone leaves. Christmas reminds me to be thankful that it happened at all." Those words settled into the quiet room more deeply than any silence Saren had ever experienced. Across her civilization, grief was managed through emotional regulation and calculated acceptance. Here, humans carried memory like another guest at the table, making room for both joy and loss without allowing either to erase the other. Caleb placed steaming bowls of soup before everyone before quietly lighting a single candle beside the tree. Warm golden light flickered across the room, reflecting gently in Saren's luminous eyes. Nobody hurried to speak. Nobody rushed the moment. Outside, snow continued falling in slow, graceful patterns beyond the frosted windows while church bells echoed faintly through the valley below. Mr. Douglas finally reached beneath the tree and handed Saren a small wrapped package tied with a red ribbon. She looked at Caleb in complete confusion. "There must be some mistake. I brought nothing for anyone." The old man smiled with quiet certainty. "That is exactly why you should open it. Around here, Christmas is not about earning a gift. It is about making sure nobody feels forgotten." Saren carefully untied the ribbon with trembling fingers. Inside rested a simple hand-carved wooden snowflake no larger than the palm of her hand. It held almost no measurable material value, yet as she traced the smooth edges shaped by another person's patient hands, something inside her shifted beyond language. For the first time in her life, an object had become precious not because of what it was made from, but because someone had wanted her to have it. When Caleb and Saren stepped back into Ashwood that afternoon, the church bells were already ringing for the Christmas community dinner. Fresh snow covered the 2 sets of footprints they had left that morning, but the memory of the quiet cabin remained vivid inside Saren's heart. She still carried the small wooden snowflake carefully in both hands, turning it gently whenever the sunlight touched its polished surface. It was imperfect. One corner had been carved slightly shorter than the others, and tiny marks from the craftsman's knife remained visible along its edges. According to every standard she had been taught, it should have been considered flawed. Yet it had become the single most valuable object she had ever owned because someone had made it for one reason alone: to remind a stranger that she belonged. The fellowship hall welcomed them with the comforting sounds of conversation, clinking dishes, cheerful laughter, and children carrying paper snowflakes they had proudly made themselves. The large table Caleb had prepared the night before still stood near the center of the room. 5 chairs were occupied by volunteers who had quietly served others throughout the season. The 6th chair, the one that had been left empty for whoever might arrive alone, was waiting exactly as before. Caleb glanced towards Saren with a gentle smile. Looks like someone finally found it. She hesitated for only a moment before taking her seat. Around the room, nobody questioned where she had come from or why she looked different. Mrs. Henderson simply handed her a basket of warm dinner rolls. The little girl wearing the navy blue winter coat smiled brightly and whispered, "Merry Christmas." Mr. Douglas raised his coffee mug with a warm nod from across the room. In that quiet moment, Saren finally understood what had left her speechless from the beginning. It had never been the lights, the music, the gifts, or the decorations. It was the extraordinary habit ordinary people had of making room for someone they had never met. Her communicator vibrated softly beneath the table. The observation window had reached its end. Saren stepped outside into the gently falling snow and looked toward the hidden vessel resting high above the clouds. "Observer Saren Vallis," the artificial intelligence announced. "Submit final evaluation of the Terran Christmas phenomenon." Saren closed her hand around the carved snowflake before answering. Previous conclusion withdrawn. State revised findings. She looked through the church windows where Caleb waited until every guest had been served before filling his own plate. Earth possesses no superior energy source. Its technology remains below galactic accord standards. Its economy is inefficient by every accepted model. None of those measurements explain humanity. Christmas is not a ritual. It is the annual choice to place another person's dignity before personal comfort. Humans prepare a place for strangers before. They know their names. They celebrate belonging as though it were their greatest natural resource. The transmission remained silent for several seconds before responding. Recommendation received. Supporting evidence will be submitted for council review. Saren lowered the communicator and returned to the warmth of the dinner, unaware that every recording she had gathered, every conversation she had witnessed, and every quiet act of compassion she had documented would soon become the most debated archive in modern galactic history. Some council members dismissed her findings as emotional contamination. Others argued that no advanced civilization should base policy upon the customs of a developing world. Months passed. Independent observers were quietly dispatched to Earth during the following Christmas season. They returned from different nations, different cities, and different families with remarkably similar conclusions. They all found the same pattern. Different languages, different traditions, different cultures. Yet everywhere they traveled, they discovered ordinary people sharing meals, opening their homes, and refusing to let strangers celebrate alone. 1 year after Saren's mission, the Galactic Council assembled once again. This time, the vote was nearly unanimous. The Terran Hospitality Protocol was adopted across every member world. Its first principle was astonishingly simple. Every public celebration would include one prepared table and one empty chair reserved for anyone who believed they had nowhere to belong. Saren remained on Earth for 3 more days before returning to her people. Before boarding the observation vessel, Caleb smiled as Saren carefully held the carved wooden snowflake in her hands. "Bring Christmas with you," she promised she would. Centuries later, historians would remember that decision as the beginning of the Great Welcome, the moment an ancient civilization stopped measuring greatness only by power and began measuring it by compassion. On worlds separated by thousands of light years, children who had never seen Earth grew up asking why every holiday gathering always included one empty chair. Their parents would smile and tell them about a small blue planet where a human once believed no one should spend Christmas alone. Back in Ashwood, Caleb quietly closed the church door after the last guest had arrived. He never learned that his smallest acts had reshaped civilizations beyond the stars. Saren looked one last time at the wooden snowflake resting in her hand before placing it gently beside her dinner plate. Outside, snow continued to fall beneath the endless night sky. Inside, the empty chair remained empty no longer, and somewhere beyond the stars, it never would again.